Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Today, we'll be having a discussion with Ric Scalzo, who earned a master's degree in herbal medicine from the School of Herbal Medicine. He was also awarded an honorary doctorate of naturopathic medicine from Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine. He ran for 32 years and then sold Gaia Herbs in 2019. He now has a regenerative farm in Costa Rica where he grows and sells his own herbal products under the Kokora brand. I plan to discuss with Rick the herbal and supplement business, regenerative farming, and then spend some time talking about herbs. It'll be a little bit different than our typical functional medicine discussion, but herbal medicine is a very important component, and it's always good to get a different perspective on that. I wanted to read a quote from Rick that I thought was pretty cool. In 2010, Gaia took home the Herbal Industry Leader Award from the American Herbal Products Association. At the time, someone asked Rick what he was most proud of, and he said, "Living my dream without compromising my values. Among those values, do no harm, work with nature, allow nature to be your healer, and honor the earth as a teacher." Rick, thanks so much for joining us. I love that quote.
Yeah, that brings me back down memory lane, Ben. Thank you for sharing that. That's pretty much sums it up. I think we're done.
That's so great. I mean, so few people really honor nature, respect it, understand the earth as a teacher. I mean, I think all of us in natural medicine should have that as part of our mindset.
Yeah, for sure. You know, the first thing you said there, honoring the earth and you know, the first premise of naturopathic medicine is the vis medicatrix naturae, you know, recognize the healing power of nature.
Right.
And so that's inscribed in that statement you made, honor the earth, you know, to recognize the value that everything that the earth brings to us.
Right. So tell us how you came to start Gaia Herbs.
Well, after I did all my education, that was in the early 80s. I started working in a medical clinic with an MD and a bunch of other holistic health practitioners. And my role was to essentially to go out and to meet with the patients and do my integrative alternative diagnostic work, and then go out and provide, harvest the herbs, make their medicines, provide them the herbal treatments. And I had a very, very busy practice. It was, over the years, it just became too much. So I decided that I would begin a line, and I didn't know that it would become Gaia, but I began a line of products. It did become Gaia. And
where did that name Gaia come from?
Well, Gaia was something I was really interested as a concept. You know, it means that, you know, we don't just live on this earth. We are part of a living entity of relations within this existence. And I thought, you know, this makes sense to me.
Where is that a word from? Is it from another culture? Or
I think, yeah. I mean, I think it has some roots in the Eastern cultures,
okay,
particularly India. But for me, it was more universal. You know, it had a concept that there's a writer, James Lovelock, who wrote a book about the interconnectedness of Gaia. And when I started learning about how we are all interconnected, all our relations are interconnected, I thought, you know, this makes sense for a company, you know, that I'm going to run. And so that's why I named it Gaia.
Cool. And what was it like running that company, and what were some of the challenges and successes that you had?
Yeah, it was fun, to say the least. I'm going to tell you though, when I started Gaia, and this may sound crazy, my ambition was to build it to a $50,000 a year company. I did not have any preconceived notion of building a very successful company at the time. I just wanted to, make herbs and provide really good quality herbal products to people, and wasn't concerned at all about, the financial gain, and it was really, I was more inspired by my own spiritual, pursuit.
And you were growing your own herbs?
Not at that time. We were getting herbs from other growers. And my concept was to take the fresh herbs, undried, and make medicines from the fresh, undried herbs, which was a new concept at the time. And so, we started doing something different, and it felt good.
So what's the difference between using fresh, undried herbs versus dried herbs?
Yeah. And it was all about the vitality. I was trying to bring the most vital force into the product at that time. You compromise a little when you do that because of the water content in fresh herbs. But, I eventually found ways to dry herbs that were more sensitive. We were using it, and then we were using maybe 110 degrees Fahrenheit in our drying mechanisms with forced air that would not disturb the properties of the herbs. So we eventually switched over to dry, but I really loved working with fresh plants. It was, it's a lot of work, but it was really joyful for me.
And so what was it like growing the company? What were some of the challenges you had?
I don't know. Like any other company, you always have to, the most important thing, Ben, you read it at the beginning, setting your values and sticking to your values. That's the trick. I would say that I'm really up there when it comes to quality and issues around quality, and people who know me in this industry know that that's kind of my ambition. And so I set really high standards. And one of the challenges is, how do you keep those standards in the midst of competition, in the midst of a of a rapidly growing industry? And I never compromised, not once. I'll tell you a story, if I can.
Sure.
Do you recall back years ago when green coffee berry extract was an emerging thing in our industry? Yep. Everybody wanted green coffee berry extract. Right. You remember that?
Yep.
Well, our team at Gaia at the time thought we should put a green coffee berry extract into our product line. And I could not find a path forward to make that was aligned to our values. And it was...
What exactly is green coffee?
Well, it was green coffee berry. It was the unripe berry that was, at that time, was being popularized, from the coffee plant. It was being popularized for weight loss. So you can imagine it caught on really fast. But anyway, I couldn't find a way to make it, the way, I needed to make it to not compromise our values. And we met every single week in our executive leadership team wanting to find a path forward. And this went on for months. And finally I said,
what were the obstacles to making green coffee herbs?
It required a certain type of standardization, some chemicals in the solvents. Those weren't my principles and my values. Purifying, isolating, structurally elucidating chemicals, taking some out, concentrating others. I didn't really subscribe to that. So I met with the team and I said, look, even before we talk about green coffee berry extract today, let's just ask us, our team of 10, if it's aligned to our corporate values. We went around and everybody said no. That was the end of the story. We never, ever visited Green Coffee Berry ever again. And it was the best decision for us to make on that product.
So you just mentioned using solvents and the extraction process. Talk a little more about why that process can lead to a more or less healthy product.
Well, the thing is that today we've entered a world of phytopharmaceuticals where products are purified, isolated, and elucidated ingredients like curcumin, turmeric. Turmeric and curcumin are two different products, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And
curcumin is one of the most important active ingredients in turmeric.
Right. And how you get to a product that's 95% pure curcumin is purifying the curcuminoids away from the turmerones, away from the volatile oils, away from all of the other constituents, which I call synergists in the plant. So there's a tremendous amount of dismantling of the wisdom of nature when you do that. Yes, you are concentrating something known to be active, but you're doing it at the sacrifice of nature's intelligence. So I subscribe to partnering with nature's intelligence, partnering with the wisdom of nature when you make herbal products. And I subscribe to using, solvents that are non-toxic instead of using acetone, hexane, and other types of non-ingestible solvents to extract. I subscribe to using pure alcohol from sugarcane, from organically grown sugarcane. Okay. And so that's, to me, that's important.
How many companies are using these chemical solvents?
I don't know. It's standard practice today in the supply chain of herbal products for companies to purify and isolate active ingredients. And, a lot of the product lines in our industry have products that are standardized, purified, and isolated that way.
And is Gaia one that doesn't use those solvents, or?
No, we never use those solvents.
Okay.
And I'm speaking for the Gaia up until the point I believe they still are honoring the value stream that we set up long ago.
Right. So when somebody's looking for an herbal supplement, what should they look for? How do they pick out if it's a good one?
Well, first of all, an herbal supplement is only as good as the herbs from which it was, from where those herbs came. So we need to know how were the herbs grown? How were they harvested? How were they processed? This is why I'm paying today so much attention to the regenerative organic cultivation of medicinal crops here in Costa Rica. But that's the first thing. You need to look at how these herbs were grown, and then I was fortunate because we had our own analytical labs at Gaia. We would test every raw material that would come in for purity, potency, and integrity. That meant we were testing it for the purity is, microbiological activity, contamination. Potency was, the testing it for the bioactivity, how strong, is the activity of the plant. And identity is just to be sure that it's the right genus and species. So testing it for its true nomenclature.
And what's the difference between Chinese herbs and Western herbs?
Well, I mean, the herbs are the same, in a sense of, but the tradition, is so much richer from China. 5,000-year tradition of herbal medicine goes way back, and it's some of the products that are used in Chinese medicine are well tested through the ages. Here, in herbalism in North America, it's a relatively young system of medicine, several hundred years. and compare it to an ancient system like the Chinese system or Ayurveda in India.
I feel better about getting herbs from a company like Gaia Kokora because I know that they're organic, and I'm very skeptical about anything grown in China, knowing how much pollution and toxins exists in that country and the water and everything else. And most of the Chinese herbs I see are not organic, and you have no idea, how they're grown. And so I'm always a little nervous. And you hear about so many products coming out of China that were contaminated.
I go to China often, and we were trying to convert then a Schisandra berry farm, which was already established. With China is interesting because if you have a community of farmers, the Chinese government will actually fund the development of those farms. And so this was one farm that was growing Schisandra berries, about 200 acres of Schisandra berries, which is an important phytomedicine.
Right.
And I was involved in converting that farm over to organic cultivation. And so it went through all of this certification process. And years later, when I went back to see how they were doing, I happened to be walking through the fields, and I happened to be noticing that they were applying some fertilizer. And I asked and I was with the inspector from the organic agency. I asked, is this organic fertilizer? And he said, yes, it is. I asked, can I see the package? So he took me to a structure where it was from ground to ceiling, in 50-pound bags of this, quote, organic fertilizer. And I said, can we look at the package? And it was a urea-based fertilizer. And I said to the inspector, this isn't organic. This isn't certified organic. He said, well, this is what the Chinese government sent us. So Ben, in these countries, you never take anything for granted. Like you said, you always have to question. And, fortunately, I have a list of questions that I always ask,
But the average consumer doesn't get to ask all those questions. They're just handing a product off a shelf or at an acupuncturist office or somewhere else. So
you're absolutely right. That's why you have to rely on companies with integrity and leaders of those companies who really, have the experience and know, the kind of questions to ask.
So it sounds like you're reinforcing this idea that we should be fairly skeptical of anything coming out of China.
You got to ask questions. Why is it that I'm here in Costa Rica developing a regenerative organic farm for 12 of the more important medicinals that are in our industry? We're growing crops for Kokora, my new company down here, and they include turmeric, ginger, ashwagandha, holy basil, moringa, some of the more relevant crops that are highly consumed in our industry. And, I'm taking it on again firsthand, not just to grow organic, but to grow regenerative organic.
Well, let's take up that topic. I think most of us have some sense of what organic means, even though I know the definition has changed over time. Unfortunately, given large corporations going into the organic business and then lobbying to have more things included in the definition of organic. But there's also this regenerative term, and it's separate from organic. And I've noticed in some parts of the industry related to food, like, for example, wine. You might see an organic wine, certified organic. You might see a wine made from organic grapes, or you might see a wine made from regenerative farming. So explain what the difference is between organic and regenerative, and which is better, or do you need to have both? I've really been enjoying this discussion, but I just want to take a few minutes to tell you about a product that I'm very excited about. Imagine a device that can help you manage stress, improve your sleep, and boost your focus, all without any effort on your part. The Apollo wearable is designed to do just that. Created by neuroscientists and physicians, this innovative device uses gentle vibrations to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, helping you feel calmer, more focused, and better rested. Among the compelling reasons to use the Apollo wearable are that users experience a 40% reduction in stress and anxiety. Patients feel that they can sleep. Their sleep improves up to additional 30 minutes of sleep per night. It helps you to boost your focus and concentration. And it's scientifically backed. And the best part is you can get all these benefits with a special $40 discount by using the promo code Weitz, Weitz, my last name, at checkout to enjoy these savings. So go to Apollo Neuro and use the promo code Weitz today. And now back to our discussion.
Yeah, the organic industry in food production is it's matured now. And when I started growing herbs organically for Gaia, we did all the right things. We were certified organic from day one, and with our agency was Oregon Tilth, and so that's a very reputable agency. One of the most rigid agencies to uphold the USDA National Organic Program, and we did everything right. We built a huge compost operation. We cover cropped. We crop rotated. We applied organic fertilizers, and we paid attention to our soil. But one thing, Ben, I will tell you, I could never move the dial in the soil. I always got tremendous amount of organic matter when I would test for organic matter in the soil. Tremendous amount of organic matter. I could never move the dial on the nutrients in the soil when we measure phosphorus, potassium, calcium, all the important nutrients. Every year, no matter what I did, the nutrients remain the same.
Okay.
That's an important thing to just hold on to for a moment. When you grow regeneratively, the one bigger difference to grow regeneratively is you're working with the soil food web. Do you understand what that means? It's a new term that regenerative agriculture is bringing forth as the most important facet of regenerative farming. Working with the soil food web, it means that we are paying attention to all of the microbiome of the soil, the beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, the nematodes, the protozoa, the arthropods, macroarthropods. All of those organisms live in a state of dynamism.
It's kind of like the microbiome of the soil.
Exactly. And what disrupts the microbiome the most is plowing, tilling, exposing your soil to erosion, exposing your soil to heat, sun damage. All of the soils, when you look at the chemical agriculture that's done on our foods today, those soils are no longer alive.
Well,
the soil web in those soils is gone.
Why do non-regenerative farms do it then?
Costs less. It doesn't really, because I'll tell you why.
Well, how do you plant the seeds without tilling the soil? Isn't the tilling to open it up so you can drop the seeds in?
There's ways to do it.
Okay.
I'll tell you what we do. And this is using an implement from Australia called the yeoman's plow. Okay. And the Yoemans, I believe that's how you spell that word.
Okay.
And yeoman's plow actually has these 24-inch shanks, and the shanks are only 1 inch wide. And so the plow is pulled by the tractor, and what it does is it opens up space in your beds, even beds that you've just grown on. You don't turn those beds over. You just go with the yeoman's plow and you go over them. And so your decaying plant material starts to get turned in, but not turned over. And what the yeoman plow does, 24 inches deep, is it loosens the soil. It creates aeration. It creates a more aerobic process in the soil. And what we do is we inject into that space that's created something that we call here in Costa Rica mountain microorganisms, which means that we make our own mountain microorganism solution with forest leaves, branches, soil from the forest. We mix it with rice semolina, molasses, coffee grinds, some herbs, and then we ferment it for 2 weeks. And we take that fermented tea, if you will, and inject it into the soil. And that becomes the food for the microbiome of the soil.
Wow, fascinating.
When you open up that space and inject the mountain microorganism, suddenly you're feeding the soil food web. And the soil food web is what goes to work to bring nitrogen to the plant roots, the right form of nitrogen, which is ammonium nitrate. And it brings it to the plant roots. And most importantly, Ben, it takes all the nutrients that are in the soil and delivers them right into the root structure of the plant. So the plant grows more robust, it grows bigger. Can I share with you an outcome of 1 year?
Sure. Let me make sure where's the share button? Where is it?
I'll just do this verbally.
Share screen options, multiple. Okay, yeah, go ahead. You're just going to share it verbally. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm just going to share it verbally. When we were growing organic turmeric, we had our biomass yield from those fields was 15,000 kilos per hectare.
Okay.
Which is considered very good.
Oh, okay.
When we converted to regenerative farming, a year later, our biomass yield was 80,000 kilos per hectare. And when we were growing organically turmeric, our curcuminoid content in the roots was 2.5%. When we converted to regenerative farming, it was close to 8.5%.
Wow.
So, when we talk about what you asked me, why, with these conventional farmers, why are they doing what they're doing? It doesn't make sense because, the increase in biomass and the increase in nutrient density from growing regeneratively is so much greater and you're able to bring much more product of value to the market. And the other side benefit of regenerative farming, because you don't till your soils always stay with greenery on top. So always your soils are sequestering carbon. They're drawing down carbon. Unlike conventional agriculture where you see, hundreds of acres at a time open to the sun, to the, to erosion, all that, we're exposing carbon into the atmosphere.
Why did they do that?
It's a good question, Ben. It's just the way our farming practices have evolved, and I think part of it is how do we control weeds? How do we, just manage these large food production fields? But honestly, regenerative farming can do it much, much better.
So if we get a choice between eating, say, regenerative versus organic, ideally it's best to have both. But if you had to choose between regenerative or organic, which should we choose?
I would choose regenerative. And I'll give you another example. A lot of us eat legumes in our diet.
Yes.
And legumes are a really good source, or they could have been, if they were grown properly, of an amino acid called ergothioneine.
Yes.
Which you've heard
also
of it?
Found in mushrooms.
Also found in mushrooms. So
I just took my ergothioneine this morning from real mushrooms.
So you know how important that amino acid is for our longevity and our well-being.
Yep.
And I'll just say to your audience that it is a very important amino acid, but you don't find it anymore in our conventional foods. you used to find it a lot in legumes.
Huh.
And Penn State University did some really interesting study growing legumes with regenerative soils. And they found in regenerative soils, the fungi in the soil, which is the mycelia, similarly to mushrooms, the mycelia and hyphae in the soil were able to enable the soil in plants to produce ergothioneine. So these beans, these legumes, now were high in ergothioneine, much like they are in mushrooms.
Interesting.
So that's another reason why you might want to think about the value of regenerative farming.
Now you can do both though, right? That would be optimal, organic and regenerative.
Well, you can't do regenerative without being organic.
Oh, you can't.
No, regenerative is organic. It's just pushing the raising the bar. And the two differentiators is no till, no plow, keep your soils covered with a carpet of green all year, and pay attention to the soil food web.
But I've seen, like, especially I've noticed with wine that some wine says regenerative and some says organic.
Yeah, it's I haven't seen regenerative cultivated grapes, but I'm sure they exist now. But I'm glad to see that. You're noticing that. That's good. That's probably a statement to the farmer who wants to who wants to contribute a better impact globally.
Is regenerative this? Because everybody uses slightly different words and they try to slip in. I've seen sustainable the same as regenerative or not?
No, it's not. Sustainable can be used in a lot of different ways. I tend to shy away from using that in farming.
Okay.
Because, organic farming in a way is sustainable. Regenerative farming is definitely sustainable. But I'll tell you, conventional farming with agrochemicals is not sustainable. Not sustainable for the soils, not sustainable for the foods that are grown, and not sustainable for human life.
Right. And not sustainable for the planet.
Exactly.
So we got about 30 minutes left. Let's spend the rest of our time talking about herbal medicine. I thought maybe I'd ask you, what are your 5 favorite herbs? And we could have a bit of a discussion about each one of them.
Yeah, let's start with turmeric.
Okay, turmeric. I love turmeric, curcumin.
Yeah, I'm growing turmeric, large amounts of turmeric down here in Costa Rica. And it is, looking at some of the data in the natural product industry, it is one of the most consumed single herbs by the population. And rightly so, because we have learned that turmeric plays an important role in our inflammatory response. So, we always are trying to promote a healthy process with regards to maintaining healthy inflammation in our body. And turmeric is one herb that helps to do that. And one way it does that is these curcuminoids that are in turmeric. They are highly antioxidant. So the antioxidant properties of turmeric also help to quelch inflammation. And, that's very important where, you have a herb which goes to work in your body to help scavenge free radicals, and which are, instigators of inflammation.
Now, I've heard a lot about turmeric not being well absorbed. And as you know, in the supplement industry, there's been a plethora of companies developing specialized forms of, typically it's specialized forms of curcumin that are blended with black pepper, are put in a fat-soluble form, are put in a water-soluble form, are combined with other herbs, all to increase the absorption and usability.
Well, this is what we do know. I'm aware of all these different manufacturing practices to improve absorption of turmeric. The simple facts is that the active properties of turmeric, the curcuminoids, are fat soluble, which means they digest better in fat. So think about that. If you're eating an avocado, you might want to take turmeric with your avocado, or if you're taking turmeric capsules, take it, during a meal which has a healthy fat. If you're taking turmeric powder and making a curry, you may want to take the turmeric powder and mix it into the ghee first, clarified butter, and let it cook into the ghee a little bit, just so that the curcumin molecules are surrounded by a fat molecule. So that's one thing. You mentioned black pepper. Black pepper is in Ayurveda, they teach us to use black pepper. And when you're making medicines with turmeric, we always use a little bit of black pepper in the medicine in order to enhance the absorption of the curcuminoids. We are now engaged with the university that I'm associated with. I have an institute at the Sonoran University of Health Sciences in Arizona. And we established the Ric Scalzo Institute of Botanical Research. And there we are doing a curcumin absorption study by freeze drying turmeric and then measuring the amount of curcumin in blood samples over different collection points, because we want to see how this curcumin is really being absorbed.
And I know some companies blend the curcumin with phosphatidylcholine to make it more fat soluble.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's, and that's a smart thing to do. A lecithin byproduct, will help to make it more fat soluble, more absorbable. But I think if you're going to use turmeric, if you don't have a phospholipid type of preparation, you may want to be sure you're eating it with a fatty meal.
Yeah, I found turmeric and curcumin to be really, really beneficial for reducing inflammation and musculoskeletal injuries, even with brain neurodegenerative conditions. And we also use it a lot in gut health. And one of the things that it's been shown to do is reduce visceral hypersensitivity, which is something that occurs as part of a lot of these gastrointestinal conditions like IBS.
Exactly.
When you see in Indian foods cumin, that's totally different than curcumin, right?
Yeah, it's a very different spice.
People sometimes get confused about that.
Yes. Curcumin is the active principle in turmeric, and cumin seed is a very different, also used in curries.
Right. Okay. Any final thoughts about turmeric before we move on to the next herb?
No, I just think that it's a herb, that doesn't discriminate you from me or whoever. Everyone should be using it, especially, as we want to age healthfully. I think turmeric is very important in an inflammatory world like we live in today.
Right.
For sure. Especially, with all the attack on our gut health. Thank you for mentioning that, Ben, because that's so important.
Now, some herbs are good to use for a period of time and then stopping, whereas other herbs you might consider for daily use. Is turmeric an herb that could be used long-term for daily use?
I think it should be used, not only could be, but should be used for a prolonged period of time. And, it's okay if you're going to take a herb with the intention of a long, treatment plan. It's okay to do it like take 6 days on and a day off, maybe 6 weeks on and a week off, maybe 6 months on and a month off. In those periods where you're taking those little breaks, those will help to integrate the effect and make it more permanent in the body. So I think it's okay to take little breaks if you're on a plan using turmeric, from time to time, take a little break.
And I think that's kind of a naturopathic principle, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
So let's go on to your next favorite herb besides turmeric.
Ashwagandha.
All right. We have the stress herb.
The stress herb. Well, yes. Now, that leads us down the whole conversation of adaptation, right?
Yep.
And you're very familiar. I want to hear your story on adaptation and how we are adapting to the world around us and the world within us. But,
it all goes back to Hans Selye and understanding the sympathetic parasympathetic system, and how, starting out with the zebra running away from the lion on the savannah, how he sees the lion and goes into sympathetic mode and muscles tighten up and goes into stress, and all the blood goes to the muscles, has to run away from the lion, and then is calm for maybe the rest of the day or for days or weeks on end until the next stressful situation. Whereas today, we're constantly under what is perceived stress. So we're constantly running away from the lion, and our bodies are not adapted to that.
Yeah. And any given day, we may have many, many incidences that trigger the adaptive response.
Right.
Where our body is exposed to a stressor, we go into a state of alarm, and then that alarm state recognizes that we're under stress attack. And then our body wants to recover from that. When we go into a state of resistance and we recover, but, exposed to many, many, many incidences of stress that way, eventually we may land in a state of exhaustion. And the one thing I'm concerned about is if we live a life where we're constantly not adapting to stress properly, eventually we're going to start drawing from our vital force for our day-to-day energy. Our day-to-day energy should come from air, food, and water.
Okay.
And not from our jing or our vital essence. And, but most of us today are premature aging as a result of taking energy from our vital force too early in life, or too much too early.
Right. So how can ashwagandha help us?
Well, it helps to manage the adaptive response so that stress is no longer distressing. Hans Selye, you mentioned him, he once said that there is no stressful situation in life, only a stressful response. Right. How we respond to stress determines its effect upon us.
Right.
Right. And so
how we perceive the situation.
The perceived situation. Yeah. And that's the thing. If you look at the people who are centenarians, and I have traveled and documented centenarian lives.
Costa Rica is one of the blue zones, right?
Costa Rica is. And if you look at their lives, the most important contributor to longevity was that they manage their mental and emotional stress. They don't take on mental and emotional stress. So not to deviate from ashwagandha, but only to say that, we have to manage the stress of life. And ashwagandha is a herb which helps us to manage stress more in a healthy way. Everybody's going to have stress, but the perception of stress by the body is what we need to manage. We can't keep spending our lives in sympathetic mode, right?
Right. Yeah. We need to encourage that parasympathetic mode through meditation, through mindfulness, through breathing exercises, through exercise, through whatever we need to get us to stay in that rest and digest mode.
Yeah. So I like to take ashwagandha as a daily supplement for that reason. And for those people who are having trouble sleeping, it can help to promote a more restful sleep.
Now, what about taking ashwagandha as a single herb versus taking a formula that also has rhodiola and, other herbs, mushrooms, etc., as a combination? What about single herbs versus combinations?
I love combinations. I think, putting two or more herbs together really makes a lot of sense to me. In fact, that's how I practiced. I would always support a person's constitution by adding herbs in combination. And I always would include herbs that tonify, that rest, bring the nervous system to a state of rest, then tonify through trophorestoratives, and then circulate the vital force from that tonification. So every formula, I would have 3 herbs in there that would address rest, tonification, and stimulation. And that was the construct of my formula. And so you mentioned rhodiola. There are other herbs that you could use for managing stress that are compatible with ashwagandha.
Right. Now, what about taking herbs, in a capsule, as a powder, as a tincture? Is there one way that's better?
I think today we need to take these herbs and elevate their concentration. So I prefer to make extracts, and either right now my process is to take the liquid extract and freeze drying it, so you get a very pure form of dry extract from it. I like that, Ben. It's very clean. There's no excipients, and it's very concentrated.
And then you get it in a capsule or a liquid or a powder?
It's a powder in a capsule.
Okay.
But freeze dried extract powder in a capsule.
Okay.
That's what Kokora is doing with its regenerative herbs now for its product line.
Okay, cool. What's another herb that's among your favorites?
Sorry for the interruptions here on the internet.
Well, I think you're on wireless, and unfortunately, wireless connections when it comes to a podcast are not always as stable.
Yeah, probably. Also, Costa Rica.
The other thing is a lot of people look at their internet speed and they get a really fast download, but they don't have much upload speed. And when you're doing a podcast, you need faster upload.
Okay, good.
So tell us your third favorite herb.
Well, you mentioned mushrooms, so we better kind of bring that into this conversation.
Yeah, reishi, shiitake, turkey tail. What are your favorite mushrooms?
I love them all. I think I was looking in the Tibetan literature.
Yeah.
And I found this recipe in the Tibetan, you talked about combining herbs. There's a recipe in the Tibetan literature that combines 5 mushrooms together for, they talk about it for immortality. Of course,
okay.
That's a crazy term, but the implication was it was used for longevity and used for protecting against cancer. And in that recipe, we are actually producing a very close proximity to that recipe for Kokora in a product called 5 Mushroom Wellness. And there is, you mentioned reishi, that's Ganoderma. That's kind of like the one of the real lead herbs for longevity and for protection, for cell protection in our body. And you mentioned turkey tail. Turkey tail is getting a lot of leverage right now on protecting the cells of our body and the tissues. And there's
lion's mane.
Lion's mane, yellow oyster. Yellow oyster is interesting, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah.
It's a naturally occurring form of ergothioneine. I'm going to keep plugging that as much as I can. That amino acid.
Yeah, we had Lee Carroll on from Real Mushrooms, and he was talking about ergothioneine and some of these other mushrooms. I think they have a 5 mushroom blend as well.
Yeah, I'm very excited about yellow oyster, and Poria is in my formula, which is not used very much, but
I don't know that one.
Poria mushroom. It's actually interesting, Ben. It's used to correct dampness in the body.
Okay.
Dampness is one of the precursors to illness. In Chinese medicine.
That's one of those Chinese medicine terms that never made sense to me, but
dampness, stagnation, and inflammation. One leads to the other.
Interesting. So let's finish with your 5th favorite herb.
Gosh, my 5th favorite herb probably would be holy basil.
All right. Now, why do you like holy basil so much?
I like holy basil. It is true that it's another adaptogen.
Right.
And I like it because it's it manages stress so beautifully. It helps to promote sleep, helps promote energy, much like ashwagandha. It's very compatible with ashwagandha.
Right. I've seen it in cortisol supportive formulas with ashwagandha.
Yeah. Helps to promote, adrenal support. So yes, absolutely. It's got to be up there on top of my list as well.
Not my favorite tea, though. It's kind of bitter.
It's kind of bitter. Are you using the right variety?
I don't know. All right, Rick. So let's wrap this up. Why don't you tell us how the listeners can find out more about you and find out about getting a hold of some of the Kokora products? Are they for sale? Where are they for sale? Can they order?
Thanks for asking. Yes, people can find us at www.kokoralife. That's spelled KOKORALIFE.com. That's our website. We are also available on Amazon, and we are also, sold in many, many natural food stores around the country now. And our product line is new. So we are expanding the product line, coming out with the regenerative line of capsules this spring. And so I hope people will look for them because they're going to be quite special.
I saw some pictures of some of the powders, maybe like a mushroom coffee blend, things like that.
Yeah. So there's a new category of taking functional powders like ashwagandha and mixing it with mushrooms and creating, like coffee alternative, healthy alternative,
right?
Golden milk powder, and an immune boosting powder,
right?
And then a 7 mushroom blend with cacao.
Okay. That sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Rick.
Yeah, Ben, thank you for having me on your show. And I look forward to, getting to know you a little better.
Sounds good. Thank you for making it all the way through this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, I would very much appreciate it if you could go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star ratings and review. As you may know, I continue to accept a limited number of new patients per month for functional medicine. If you would like help overcoming a gut or other chronic health condition and want to prevent chronic problems and want to promote longevity, please call my Santa Monica Weitz Sports Chiropractic and Nutrition office at 310-395-3111, and we can set you up for a consultation for functional medicine. And I will talk to everybody next week.